Hey friends, as you probably know, YouTube is not my only platform. It's not even really my primary platform. I would say that my primary platform is TikTok, and over there I've been doing this queer self-defense series. And I just kind of wanted to stitch it together and put it up here on YouTube so that you all are able to see it as well, or for people who just prefer to watch things on YouTube, want to see a large segment of the series all at once. So what you're about to see is just all of the ones that I produced so far stitched together. There are going to be more. And if there's any specific topics that you would like me to cover for this series, make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know. And if you support my work, please consider giving to me on Patreon or on Buy Me a Coffee so I can do more of this. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. So here are the TikToks. We live in a time of rapidly escalating violence against the queer community and especially the gender non-conforming community. So it's time for us to talk about this stuff. First things first, let's get this out of the way. I am not an expert on self-defense. For me, it's been a hobby for a long time. Definitely would not say that I'm an expert. But you know who are experts in self-defense? The people who wrote this zine, a self-defense study guide for trans women. Really, it's for all trans femme folks. And the people behind this are Trans Fighters Oakland. It even has a nice little endorsement from Fallon Fox, a former MMA fighter, on the back. I recommend that all queer people order a copy of that zine, but especially trans femmes, because it is very much targeted towards us, because a lot of things that work for other people just simply do not work for us. This is going to be a multi-part series, and it may even be an ongoing series, and we will very likely dive into the contents of that zine, at least to some extent, in the future. The most important thing to keep in mind about self-defense is the vast majority of it is really all about knowledge and preparedness. It's about choosing the places that you go, the people that you're with, even the clothing that you're wearing. I know we don't like to think about that, but that is the reality that we live in. All those sorts of things, situational awareness, little details like that, just knowing what is most safe for you and making smart decisions to not put yourself in a situation that may become dangerous for you. That is the biggest tenet of self-defense. However, if you've been living as an openly queer person, especially as a trans person in the United States for a while, you probably already know that because you've been dealing with this shit for so long. And so we're not really going to go into that too much right now. However, I do want to say this. When one finds themselves in a violent confrontation where perhaps two people want to hurt each other, or one person wants to hurt the other and the other isn't so into it, whatever the case may be, when you find yourself in a situation like that, both individuals have their own odds of prevailing. Let's just say in this case, the odds are 60-40 in favor of my attacker. Those odds are not fixed and they are not known. They can never be 100%. There is no guarantee, and therefore violent conflict is to be avoided at all costs. However, the one thing that you can do to increase your odds more than anything else, to increase the chance of you prevailing if somebody were to target you with violence, is to carry a weapon. And that's why that's what we're going to talk about in the next part of this series. If you haven't watched part 1 of this series, please stop watching this video, go back and watch part 1 first. So here's the thing about weapons. They're deadly. As soon as they show up in a situation, that is going to escalate the level of violence, or at the very least the threat level of the situation that you're in. As soon as a weapon is produced in a violent situation, it becomes a life or death struggle. It may not have been a life or death struggle before, or some of the participants may not have viewed it as a life or death struggle. But once that weapon comes out, everybody's life is in danger, and everybody is going to act accordingly. They're going to use whatever force they feel necessary to make sure they don't die. Bad guys don't want to die either. Therefore, it is absolutely imperative that you do not produce a weapon ever unless you are willing to escalate that situation significantly most likely to the point of deadly or very nearly deadly force. It's just not something that you want to do. You're putting yourself at greater risk unless it's absolutely necessary. In terms of what kind of weapon you should use or carry in your daily life, it's very personal and it's really up to you. It depends on a lot of different factors, but I would say that there are two very important rules to keep in mind. Rule number 1, guns are best. Rule number 2, something you will carry with you and train is better than something that you won't carry with you and train. In other words, something is better than nothing. We'll dive more into these concepts in the future, especially gun ownership, since that's going to take a lot more discussion and we just don't have time for that right now. But I just wanted to spend the rest of this time talking about a few different popular self-defense weapons tonight. Pepper spray. Pepper spray is better than nothing, but also pepper spray really fucking sucks. People can fight through it. All it really does is hurt you. It's more of a compliance tool than it is an actual weapon. That's the reason that law enforcement use it so much. The same goes for tasers. People can fight through a taser, and the commercially available tasers and stun guns, they're pretty bad anyway. Honestly, all they really do is just like hurt, doesn't do much. Knives are incredible. They're an extremely powerful weapon. They are relatively easy to use. If a gun is not an option, that is pretty much always what I would go with if I had to use a weapon to defend myself. If you do decide to carry a knife, figure out what is legal for you to carry concealed in your jurisdiction. Pick a knife that is very easy for you to pull out of your pocket and deploy. Practice it. Practice pulling it out of your pocket and deploying it over and over and over again. Just do not cease practicing that. Every single day, once or twice, pull that bitch out of your pocket and get ready to use it. As promised, we're going to be going into some of the concepts in the self-defense study guide for trans women. Is really geared towards all gender non-conforming folks, especially AMAB gender non-conforming folks. But there's a lot of things in this video that are going to be applicable to all queer people. Specifically, we're going to be discussing group dynamics and how that plays a role in self-defense. Oftentimes, the people that target you will do so because they perceive that they have some sort of power over you, or they perceive that you can't just talk back to them. You can't just stand up for yourself simply. And that very well may be the case. That often is the case. Think about how many times like a teacher or a boss or like a partner of a parent, something like that, have said things that hurt you. And if you were to just speak back and respond in kind, you would be perceived as the bad guy. And these sorts of situations can quickly escalate into violence. What if this is a partner of a parent who you rely on them for a place to live, and you have to be there in the same home as them? What if the person that you can't simply talk back to is, say, a police officer? Aggressive posturing or trying to argue one-on-one can easily backfire in that situation and can lead to situations where that person is going to punish you in ways that you simply cannot defend yourself against. Remember, you can't change somebody's mind who already hates you. It's just not going to work that way. However, what you can do is you can manipulate that situation to your advantage, specifically by drawing attention to the situation and relying on their embarrassment. This can be a really tricky thing, especially for neurodivergent folks like myself. This involves reading the room. This involves not really focusing so much on the words you're saying, but how you say them, which is just not something that I'm terribly good at interfacing with, but that's just the reality of the situation. You just have to you have to remember that the bystanders will not intervene. This is a bluffing tactic. This is you making the person who is being aggressive towards you think, in this situation, the people around me might turn against me. They might not be on my side, and so maybe I should back down. And posture is extremely important here. If you're leaning in, if you're staring intently, if your posture and your facial expressions and that sort of thing are perceived to be aggressive, then unfairly, people will most likely judge you as a trans woman or as a trans femme individual as being the aggressor in that situation. They're going to read it as such, and they're going to react accordingly. Instead, take a step back, show that you are the one who is being attacked here. Choose your words carefully, but remember, it's not so much about the words, it's about making it clear that you are not the aggressor. The other person is the one who is doing something aggressive towards you, and you're not trying to make that person feel bad for what they're doing. They're not going to feel bad for what they're doing. You're trying to make that person rethink what they're doing based on what they perceive others around them will believe about the situation. Bystanders and crowds almost always side against trans women, and this is even more true if the trans woman happens to be a person of color. These are important tactics to learn and to practice, but we must remember that most of the time crowds will not side with trans women. Even crowds full of trans people very often just simply will not side with you in these cases. In fact, trans folk and other allies are very likely to turn against you in these situations, so you cannot rely on their actual intervention. This is only a valid tactic when a bluff is the most reasonable way to handle the situation at hand. Obviously, if somebody approaches you aggressively and seems that they may be putting you in a violent situation, or they're just being threatening, maybe they're hurting you with their words, they're trying to harm you in some way, something like that, but things haven't escalated to physical violence, obviously the best strategy is to disengage. Unfortunately, sometimes when there is a perceived power imbalance, your attempt to disengage will be met with this. Somebody grabbing onto your arm and not letting you leave. And there's all sorts of situations where somebody might be grabbing onto your arm and it would be a very bad thing. It's very important to know how to get out of this simply and effectively. So this is actually going to be the first episode of this series where I actually introduce you to a technique. Now, I am not an expert in self-defense. I am also not an expert in grappling. It's just one of those things that's been a hobby for me. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt. It would not hurt at all for you to go on YouTube and look for like grip escapes. Look up no-gi grip escapes and look up jiu-jitsu practitioners and trainers teaching people how to do this. No-gi, N-O-G-I grip escapes, and you'll find the kind of stuff that we're looking for, taught by professionals who are able to teach you far better than me. That said, here's how you do a grip escape. So again, this is really only addressing if somebody is grabbing onto your arm. There's a lot of other places people can grab onto. They can grab onto your clothes, they can grab your neck, all sorts of things. They can grab onto your body. This is just talking about if somebody is grabbing onto your arm, because that's kind of a common thing when there's a perceived power imbalance. People feel like they can get away with that. It doesn't really matter where on the arm they're grabbing you. I mean, if it's way up here, that's one thing, but usually people are going to grab your forearm somewhere, usually kind of towards your wrist, right? So let's just say that they grabbed you right here. It also doesn't matter what way they're facing. So if they were facing the other way and had grabbed me like this, it's basically the same thing. Really what matters is we're looking for where their thumb is. So while your arm is grabbed, you're going to roll your wrist towards the thumb. So in this case, the thumb is behind my arm, so you can't see it on the camera. So I'm going to roll in that direction. Just simply like this, and then push with the back of your hand. And you don't even really need to push with the back of your hand. Kind of just the rolling motion often, like look, it's already weakening my grip quite a lot. And so if you just push, it just comes right off. And I've always heard it described as pushing with the back of your hand. It doesn't actually feel to me like that's what I'm doing. It feels like that's kind of a part of it. It's hard to explain. It's more of a feel thing. So here's what I want you to do. If you want to learn this technique, go find somebody that you can practice this with. Practice them grabbing onto your arm. Let them grab on nice and hard. If you can't escape with them grabbing on very hard, then loosen up and then just work your way until you get good enough at it rather, that it doesn't matter how hard they're holding on to you. This is a pretty easy thing to pull off. and then just do it over and over again. Let your partner practice. Practice things like, this isn't as important, but maybe practice rolling in the other direction, rolling towards the fingers. These 4 fingers are much stronger than just a thumb, but in the heat of the moment, you might not be able to think it through and make sure that you're rolling your wrist in the right direction. So it might be good to practice that too. But ultimately, you just want this to be good muscle memory. This could save your life. This could prevent you from being put into a worse situation than you already are. All sorts of things. It can give you the room, both physically and socially, to assert your physical boundaries without escalating the situation. We all know that there is safety in numbers, and the best way to keep ourselves safe in potentially dangerous situation is to be with a group of trusted friends. But the details of how to leverage those numbers for maximum effect and maximum safety can be a little tricky. And so we're going to talk about that today. And in order to do so, I had to enlist the help of a few friends. So, this little hobbit right here is going to represent the victim, the person who's being bullied, intimidated, harassed, or is being put in danger in some way. This little orc right here is going to be the aggressor. I guess they just want to take the hobbit to Isengard or something. And these Rohirrim are going to represent you and your friends, these brave horse lords. So probably the most important detail to remember is that when the aggressor approaches, you don't want to just continue hanging out in a little group talking in a circle like you probably were before or whatever it is. No, what you want to do is you want to fan out. You want to show that you have strength in numbers. Most bullies are opportunistic, and if they see that you have people on your side, they're very likely to rethink their actions. It's natural to want to avoid danger, and so when someone's being very aggressive, our instinct often may be to fan out, but to stand behind the person who is being picked on. This is not the best solution. You want to be side by side, shoulder by shoulder, presenting a united front. And if your friend wants to get behind you, that is perfectly acceptable. What's even better than all that is if you can manage to get somebody behind the aggressor. This will make the aggressor feel tremendously unsafe. And this is even better if the person behind them is somebody who is willing and able to throw down, because this is just a great position to do that from. It's also a great idea to make the person aware that someone is behind them. Humans have really good instincts, and a lot of times we'll just know that somebody is behind us and watching us without actually having to see them, but it doesn't hurt to give the bully a little tap on the shoulder just so they know the situation that they find themselves in. Like most of the things that we discuss on this series, the primary purpose behind these tactics is to prevent a violent situation from occurring or to prevent violence from escalating. So while they would be helpful if violence actually does occur, to be in these positions, it will give you an advantage. Just remember that mostly you want to be using this as a bluff, because fights are very dangerous and should be avoided at all costs.